So good morning and welcome. This morning we're here at Coffee Club TEDx with Aidan Larkin, the Chief Executive and Founder of Asset Reality. Aidan, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming and thanks for coming along and having a coffee with me.
In this beautiful cup, thank you very much.
Bit of product placement then. Look, Aidan, like I say, you're just really welcome. Like we haven't met before in person, so it's an absolute pleasure, but we've having a chat on the phone about the work you're doing, and I think part of these conversations are about hearing a little bit about yourself and what your particular passion is, and we'll get a chance to talk about that in a minute, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background. How have you got to today? Because it's a really interesting journey.
It's certainly been it's been a strange sort of set of circumstances. I was just doing some research, and ironically, I was born in 1983, and in 1983 was then at the time one of the world's biggest robberies, the Brinksmat robbery.
Oh, yes,
100 million in diamonds and cash and jewels, and Shergar was also kidnapped. So there's a running joke in the family that I was always going to be involved in investigations or asset recovery. For me, what I'm passionate about is about trying to create opportunities. I grew up in Ardoyne in North Belfast, and I spent a lot of time just looking back, sort of thinking, did I get opportunities that others maybe didn't get? And how could I change things and try and create, without sounding cliched, how could I try and create opportunities for others? So growing up in North Belfast, I had a chance to go to America on one of the cross-community projects that got you off to America for 9 weeks. But it was a bit sort of Hunger Games dystopian, no names out of a hat, only 10 kids out of the 30 were chosen. And of course the other kids are crushed that they don't get to go to America. And I got to go see a different world, and it did change my outlook. I mean, spending 9 weeks over there, seeing how different people lived, seeing that there wasn't religious conflict, you were seeing a meritocracy in other ways, and it really did sort of focus. I mean, I think I came back and got a paper round, and that sort of started to drive me to, I'm going to start sort of working. And then through my career then, I've worked as a criminal investigator, I was a tax inspector, and then I've also worked in insolvency and latterly in asset management. So when assets are seized off criminals, I would have been the person sort of either investigating, recovering those assets, and then effectively selling them and getting money back into the pot. Where that is relevant for society, and I think people don't understand enough about it.
No, I agree. I think that would be one of the really good things to talk about today.
Like we say asset recovery. I mean, in Canada, asset recovery is, and America is no taking stuff from your hard drive. Asset management in some parts of the UK is around your stocks and share portfolio. For the military, it's about getting the most out of their assets. And I think that's part of the problem. People don't realise that the money raised from proceeds of crime sales anywhere in the world, that's the central pot. We keep talking about the public purse. So when we talk about sort of initiatives like this, when we talk about communities getting support and getting funding, that's all achieved through the money that central government can allocate to them, or that the police and crime commissioner literally has the availability to write a check and support community initiatives, support projects. And I often think, and again using my own sort of micro sort of experiences, quite a lot of the guys I went to school with committed suicide. Some ended up on the wrong.
Big issue in North Belfast in particular.
It's a huge thing, and you've got North Belfast as well. You've got Mary McAleese is from Ardoyne. I mean, the opportunities are there for people, and it's not to make excuses either. I think that some people obviously aren't taking opportunities they're presented, but I can't help but think, what if all 30 kids in my class had the opportunity to go away? And now, sort of bring things to date, I set up Asset Reality because I wanted to be able to increase the narrative around the world, around seized asset performance, because that money is the money that pays for these initiatives, and it puts money back into the pot. So if I can do my bit and try and increase awareness while I'm sort of consulting with organisations like the UN, or I'm working with countries directly, but back in Northern Ireland, it's the same issue. There is not enough money going back into the pot. And what I've seen in my consultancy and my sort of career to date, it's all unforgivable inefficiencies in the system. It's not that there's just this massive legal red tape and we can't get access to it. It's just that the right people aren't lining things up correctly. So there should be tens of millions available just in Northern Ireland. And if you then extrapolate that across the world, there should be billions available. But we're just letting things drag on. So in an average criminal investigation, they seize the crook's assets and they let them sit for 4 or 5 years. You know what that does to a car. And then at the end, we then have 20% of the value of the assets. And then when someone like yourself comes along and says, I have a good community initiative, I want to get some funding, there's simply not enough money to go around.
Yeah.
So just by making that small change in terms of legislation and policy and lawmakers, making a few tweaks, we could actually see that there could be tons of funds available, which would then create other opportunities for people.
And when we talked about it, you were saying it nearly feels like it's nearly like a translation service or a connection service or some kind of matching, and then because there's a whole area around assets and I suppose the sale of them and that I wasn't aware of, and you know, there's something really interesting. I'm assuming maybe people tuning in won't know very much about how that works.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it's one of the things. I mean, we've worked with BBC and ITV on different television programmes when I was the asset recovery director at Wilson's Auctions. I mean, it makes the headlines. Everyone loves to hear about the Chanel handbag or the Louis Vuitton bag or the seized Bentley or Bitcoin being taken from the criminal and sold at auction. But what we're not doing, and it's just simply not in the public awareness, we're not looking and saying, "God, that's great, we got £1 million back." But what I'm saying is, it could have been 10.
Okay.
And where has that come from? And one of the things that really made me sort of sit up and sort of almost feel like a social responsibility. My own son has ASD. Yes. He's had some wonderful support and help over the years in Northern Ireland. But admittedly, there could be a lot more. Yeah. There could be a lot more projects, a lot more funds, a lot more things. And I sort of have thought throughout my career, well, if I'm the one brought in to sort of fix things or I see issues, well, maybe if I can start to get some public support, we shouldn't just be talking about someone's been arrested and they've got 10 years in prison, or someone's been, you see the headlines when there's the drugs on the side of the road and the police have got the big seizure and they're all standing over like their bounty that they've got that day. I think the narrative needs to be, how much did we get back as society? We talk about the crime should not pay. Yeah. It's one of the big great initiatives all around the world. Tragically, we're so far, we're not even at the races. I mean, if this was a marathon, the criminals have already completed the race and are having a rest, and we haven't tied our shoelaces yet. I mean, the last Europol and UN report, 1% of criminal proceeds. Now, if you imagine, the criminal proceeds is our pot for society. 1% globally is confiscated. I mean, this for me should be world headlines. Yeah. We should be aghast. There should be protests in the street. We should be saying, what on earth is going on? And the example that made me start to look at things differently was in 2008, you may remember the story, a lady in South London walked into a Starbucks and saw a water tap running in the background and asked the question, why is your water tap running? I mean, Starbucks meant to have good environmental credentials in 2008. And she was told it's company policy. It's because it keeps the taps clean, or some ridiculous response. And this lady, in her credit, went and sent an email to Starbucks head office. And this was in October 2018. I think it was the 26th of October 2008. And she got a response from head office saying it's our policy. She gave it to the Sun newspaper, and the Sun got someone to go into virtually every major city in the world. And from Canberra to California, there was photographs of this water tap running in the background, and Starbucks were wasting 23 million litres a day. Wow. And within 4 days, their global policy had changed, and they literally turned off the taps.
Yeah, so it's about raising awareness, I suppose.
I need my whistleblower. Yeah. I need someone to be. I'm a lecturer in the International Anti-Corruption Academy, and I spend time in developed countries, and we have this sort of, I think, almost snobbery that it's a problem in the African countries, or it's a problem in the Southern American countries. It's worse in the UK. Yeah. It's worse in the developed countries because we have all of the infrastructure there. And like I say, the public are amazed when there's something going on in Starbucks, and we'll take up arms and we'll sort it out in 4 days. So I just want to really increase the dialogue so that people know to ask their lawmakers and their politicians, what are we doing differently? Naomi Long's currently in the hot seat in Northern Ireland. She's made some sort of wonderful, passionate sort of statements about what we're going to do. And I'm hoping that if I can go around the world sort of spreading this message to say, well, actually, some small tweaks will make this massive difference, but I just need the public support.
And it's connecting that money, I suppose, to causes that need it. And these organisations, as somebody who runs a charity and a social enterprise, the money's going to be needed now more than ever. So I suppose
how easy has it been for you to get funding from the Proceeds of Crime Fund, for example?
No, not really. It's really difficult to get funding at the best of times. And I think, as we were talking about before, it's that feeling of trust and understanding when you're doing a good job, that the money connected into that drives impact. And it's just interesting because I just know so many good organisations, and I suppose that's that timing thing that we talked about, isn't it?
I think as well there's this wonderfully sort of virtuous cycle. I mean, if you take assets of criminals, well, the kids in the community who are watching the Mr. Big of that area, there's a nice sort of societal impact on that, that they can see that, right, we're taking the assets off the bad guys. That can influence the decision making of a 13-year-old who has this person in high regard. You take the assets off, then the money goes back into the same economy and the same society that it's been taken from. Yeah. And it should be that nice flywheel that the assets are seized, the money goes back into the pot, it goes into initiatives, it goes into community causes, and it ultimately keeps kids from doing the same thing.
So it's that kind of circular thing or preventative thing, but it's not happening.
It's not happening, and that's one of the things that we sort of try and get the message out. And I mean, I know we talked about it earlier on. There's some wonderful initiatives, Civic Dollars in Belfast right now, where creating a closed loop. Is there a way of taking the proceeds of crime funding and putting that to good use? Because I think one of the big concerns internationally is that, well, if you generate all of this money, if I'm successful tomorrow and there's hundreds of millions to be given out, what we've seen in other countries is that money can then be used corruptly, and the money's then used to sort of feather other people's nests. So embracing things like virtual currencies and ways like that, and Belfast City Council deserves sort of credit for that, in having this sort of facility to say, well, we're looking as part of our smart cities initiatives, ways of incentivizing people to do good, and they get a civic dollar and it helps them. I want to bring in proceeds of crime into that and say, well, actually, if we have this pot and you're registered as a recipient and you get all the due diligence and all the checks done, it'll help that flow of civic dollars to you. And instead of them giving you £1,000 check, they maybe give you £1,000 civic dollars, for example, which you can only redeem in regulated places that are paying their tax. And because I think that's one of the big problems globally, is that the proceeds of crime funds go on the wrong virtuous cycle, and they go back into the pots. And like you say earlier, with COVID now, I just think, go back to the Starbucks tap, we just simply can't afford to be complacent anymore. There will be no funding available. So the timing's actually been quite sort of fortunate for me that I'm around the world sort of talking about how we can take criminals off bad guys and what can we do with the sort of resulting funds. I think now everyone's almost sitting up and saying, West Yorkshire Police is a good example. The residents in West Yorkshire, their council tax was increased to help fund the policing deficit for the policing budget. But there's millions of pounds in the UK just depreciating because someone seized a car and it's sat in a field for 5 years. And companies like Wilson's Auctions, who I worked for, do a great job at trying to manage and maintain the asset, but you can't stop the clock. So as an asset manager, we're trying to sort of appeal to the lawmakers to say, and I should stress, the law allows you to sell a depreciating asset, but it's this risk of litigation. Or what if you sell it and they're not guilty? Well, if you sell it and you're convicted of a crime, well, that's great, that's fine. But if you're not guilty, would you rather have the value of your Range Rover the day it was seized, or your 5-year-old Range Rover that hasn't turned a wheel in 5 years? So even at that, there's no logical argument. And countries like Netherlands already do it. Netherlands seize assets, they sell it. As long as it's not sentimental, they sell it already. And I'm a bit of a cynic because the UK has a major problem with money laundering. I mean, 2 trillion per year is the global money laundering figure just in a year. The UK was the only country, I think the UK and Denmark were the only two in 2014 that didn't sign up to this initiative around centralising asset management offices and asset recovery, which would then give you an auditable person responsible for everything. The UK didn't sign up to that, and the UK and Denmark have probably the worst European track record in money laundering. The Danske Bank scandal in Estonia, which went through Denmark, and in the UK, London is widely regarded as the money laundering capital of planet Earth. So having that lack of central office, that's one of my big agendas, is to lobby to create a central asset management office, because that means there would be a person, if Maeve was the head of this asset management office, you're the person balancing the books, you're the person looking, saying, well, why is that sat for 5 years and not been sold? The UK doesn't have that, but we're one of the only countries in the world that doesn't have a centralised asset management office. And the cynic in me says, is it about being loose and open for business to the Russian oligarchs? But I think if the public can force Starbucks to change policy in 4 days, surely if we all sort of get together, knowing that this money goes to good causes, it doesn't go to line the pockets of parliamentarians.
It's making money touch the sides, isn't it? There's something about that as money flows through. If you were, you know that we're going to have listeners to this, hopefully people are tuning in while we're having coffee. What would be your ask to them?
I would be asking them to ask the questions of their MPs and their politicians. And the example I give is during COVID, we all listen to the daily briefings. And none of us are sort of epidemiologists, and we hear all these conversations about the R and stats and figures. Let's start talking about asset recovery statistics, because no one will be able to tell you. You could walk into Stormont today and ask anybody, even the former justice ministers, what's the figure that should have been recovered, the depreciating figure, against what was recovered? And nobody knows the answer because I think it would cause a lot of red faces. And that's not a Northern Ireland, that is everywhere in the world.
Start asking questions, you think?
I have the same joke with my son saying, like, I don't want to talk about how long they got in prison. I want to know what we got back. There's people in the UK who have been known fraudsters. And what hit home for me when I was in Wilson's is that a couple that were a victim of a Ponzi scheme and the husband tragically died. We're selling these watches seized from a fraudster and the lady is literally in the front row. ITV covered it in police camera auction, which is quite a cliched sort of fun programme, but this was quite the serious sort of segment, and it was heartbreaking. This lady knows she's lost her life savings. What we get for this watch goes back to her. So I want to educate people to say the proceeds of crime auctions as well, they put money back into the pot. People should support them and get behind them. I think there's still a bit of a snobbery and a perception around. So I would say support the auctions and ask your leaders what is happening. How much did we get back in asset recovery, seized assets? And that for me would be the question, because if we ask that, it'll force them into action. And
probably just to conclude then, you mentioned about crime paying. Just go through that again with us, because I think that's it's a lovely way of thinking about it.
And I can sort of finish off on that. They talk about that crime should not pay. Yeah. It shouldn't pay, but it does. And like coronavirus, we like stats because we can question stats and we can look at things. We have the stats. Crime does pay. So any of the speeches I give or keynotes I give, they always say crime shouldn't pay. I say no, we need to make crime pay. Make crime pay for the damage it's caused to society, because right now they're making billions and we're losing out as society. So I think I keep going back to the Starbucks analogy, that if we can force enough of an uproar and start asking the questions, I think that's what will affect change.
Great. Well, hopefully this is the start of it.
Very much so.
And I just wanted to thank you again for your time and for your passion. You've educated me, and I hope all our listeners have enjoyed hearing about it as well.
Thank you for the coffee and for...
You're very welcome. I'll have you back, you and your son's back soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aidan.